Okay, so if we can start, what are the primary reasons organizations fail to align data with their overall strategy? And I guess how can they address this gap effectively?
I think it's a really interesting time at the moment. We've had so much hype around AI. We've forgotten we've been doing AI for actually about 20 years. As soon as ChatGPT and LLMs came on, it almost became a silver bullet for businesses and a distraction. So what we ended up with is kind of the great hope going into AI strategies rather than that solid thinking of a business strategy. How do they then go make the business resilient? Think about digital operations and using then data as an underpinning language when something goes wrong or you have a difference of opinion to use it as a common ground to go and get to the actual truth. And so I think we went through the last few years of kind of maybe stopping to really think about businesses and overall business strategy into, I must think about this as a technology company. I think that's makes it hard and challenging.
Okay, and following on from that, how can I suppose call it pragmatic leadership help organizations transform data collection then into an actionable insights? And I guess the time frame is important here because I mean you maybe over several years, but to get value up and running quickly, sort of months rather than years, if you like.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Phil. I think it's the month rather than years now that businesses are being measured on. I think, we're getting pressure for shareholder return as fast as possible, and that's driving the need to go and innovate quickly. So I think what businesses are now having to go to is go back to core principles. We've seen a lot of businesses out there, and when they talk on the annual results, saying we're going to focus on what we do best. They're then starting to take one step back on the AI is going to solve everything journey, and where do I actually go and get efficiency gains from this? Typically, in the operational space, is a great way of using AI to go and augment an organization. And then we've got the follow on to that with the kind of the emergence of the theme of agentic AI, starting to layer on those possibilities of orchestration on the operational side to go and help with decision making, to go and make my organization much more efficient, get better ideas of what's happening inside of that. If I can get that right, and I start to think about a business really at the essence of what it is, it's an organization that has to take lots of decisions, all the way from the executive level, all the way down to that frontline level. So the more pressure I can take off that frontline decision making and allow them to be kind of liberated with better data, better context, I'm able to go and set them free. And it's that kind of rise in pragmatism, realizing that AI is not going to solve everything, that I've really got to look at the return on investment and value of any type of investment in new technologies and new approaches and think about the staff on the front line. How do I go and enable them to make better decisions? Actually ends up having a macro impact on the transformation because then you're liberating people. You're setting them free to go and make decisions, evolve the organization, test new ideas, understand the implication of their ideas, and really build that kind of flywheel momentum of transformation.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on agentic AI in a moment, but just before I do, just be good to understand from your experience, in particular, what would you say are the most common data-related challenges that businesses face? And I guess it'd be good to understand how they can or how they have overcome them in terms of achieving some good result, high impact results from that process.
I think the hardest bit about data-related challenges really comes down to metrics. I think people can oversteer on data and get too much into hundreds, thousands of different metrics you can go and monitor and almost get paralyzed into decision making. You have so much out there. It's almost anyone that's thinking about AI at the moment. If you have a background like myself or non-tech background, it's almost impossible to keep up. And so you can really kind of worry about what do I actually focus my time on? And the same we find in the data landscape. People spend too much time just trying to get as much data in as possible rather than thinking about what are the signals that my business needs to be able to go and make a decision to actually change something. And am I going to measure performance on this metric, or am I going to just monitor this metric to give me like an indication something might need looking into? And I think I'm quite passionate about this topic because if we go and give the wrong metrics and the wrong data that someone's going to go and have their performance measured on, or you're going to measure the performance of a service on, we can go and get unnatural behavior. versus saying, let's allow people to monitor different signals and then make an informed decision on the best use of their time. So I think data, when it's done right, isn't let's go and get everything together. Let's look at the signals of what shows me something's working, something's not. So we had this with Heineken. Heineken have a very complex operation. It's multinational. They've got lots of breweries around the world. And so what they did was, rather than trying to look at taking all the data from everything, they looked at the interconnected data that shows whether something's on time, whether they've got a weather event coming, whether they've got an uptick in orders, to be able to go and give indications to the other departments that they need to go and collaborate. Like, hey, I've noticed the supply chain or on the production line is starting to slow down. Do we need to go and do something about this and have a conversation, then look into it, get the people with the expertise, rather than trying to bring in all the data and then make sense of it. It's almost overwhelming.
Okay, and sort of to a certain extent, following on from that, in terms of the biggest challenges businesses face when adopting agentic AI, it'd be good to understand that, and also particularly bear in mind what we just discussed about, people trying to do too much all at the same time. What are the risks and how can they mitigate, moving too quickly when, they've got all these vast amounts of data that AI is potentially giving them to, what are they supposed to do with it all, I suppose?
So I think firstly, I'm super positive and excited about what agentic AI could do. Just thinking about even in your home life, imagine lots of different agents working together to go and make your life more efficient. I think when you bring that into a business context, one of the biggest challenges you've got to look at, well, why are we bringing this in? You probably bring it in because we don't have a process that is working well at the moment. And actually, ultimately, any process, quite a lot of time, has human decision making in that, either making the decisions or codifying how you go and make the decision. So you have imperfection, you have variance of opinion, you've got variance of external factors putting into that. So when I bring agentic AI into that, what I'm almost doing is I'm offloading that decision making into something else that's having to learn, having to adapt, having to be able to sense what the outcomes are that it's generating and whether they're good or bad. So you're going to have to put a lot of effort into agentic AI to understand the context of the whole system and the impact of the efficacy of that agentic AI, and actually invest in it. I think if you invest in it, you're going to go and get some really great results, but it's not something you're just going to deploy and immediately see results from, just like you're going to stand up a new team, with humans in and go and say, right, we're going to be more efficient because this team is great and they're going to handle a new process, we invested in it. It takes time for that to bed in, to get kind of those kinks out of the system. But if you put the right data, the right metrics behind it, the right kind of retrospectives and even pre-mortems, why is this going to fail? What have we not thought about as we're developing it, bringing those different ranges of opinion? Agentic AI has so much possibility to start to take off workload from people so they can go and work on higher value tasks.
Okay, and bear in mind, you say you're not going to deploy it, straight out of the box, if you like. What advice would you give to organisations in terms of how to begin experimenting with agentic AI responsibly, and also, particularly, I suppose, without, again, there's a possibility that if they haven't built up the right infrastructure, their existing system strategies might just get, overwhelmed, flooded with it. So, yeah, thoughts there.
I think it's like everything. I think it has to be start small and start cross-functionally. It's not just an IT prerogative to go and deploy all of this. We need to bring in business owners, support, operations, coaching, your internal enablement function to start to show people what you're doing, why you're doing it, how things are changing, what works and what didn't work. And you've got to put the hard effort in, almost like gardening. If you've missed the season for planting bulbs because you're now thinking about spring, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. You've got to do things step by step, wait, understand, is this working? Is this not? Am I getting the results from it? Because all too often, and what we saw in the big data space, what we saw a lot on the cloud transformation, the early days of the AI wave, is that rush to try and do everything. And the businesses that took some time, they looked at end to end, who needs to be involved in bringing in agentic AI? What do we think it's going to do in terms of benefits? And how do we put in a system of continual retrospectives in the deployment of this or the ones that really learnt as an organization how to deploy it? I think the more you can build that learning organization philosophy into the deployment of agentic AI, you're going to get a huge acceleration over the coming months and years on what you're able to go and do, because you're able to go and build that up from the moment. You've got to think about, how do I think about cyber? How am I going to think about observability of all of those systems, impact of those systems? How do I make people less scared of it? How do I go and show people that this is positive and what else could we do? And then how do I bring creativity into it? When we understand the system, how do I go and let people free on what else could we go and do with this? So I think it's a change in leadership. I think it's pragmatic, starting small, but then really helping build that flywheel. I think that's going to be the main role of leaders in this journey, is helping support the organization to build that flywheel effect.
Okay, and in terms of the likely, I mean, clearly it's relevant to a lot of organizations across a lot of sectors, but do you think there are particular industries that will be or already are the early adopters of agentic AI? And any thoughts as to the sort of outcomes they may experience, over the next couple of years or so, I suppose.
Well, I think any organization that has a strong kind of help desk, strong IT infrastructure is a great candidate. So that's, financial services tend to quite heavy investment in technology, but also organizations like retail who have incredibly complex operations, both from a business to consumer, but then when they think about supply chain and how they have to interoperate with multiple vendors, multiple different technology stacks. Those are two examples of verticals that are going to be really prime candidates for the bringing in of agentic AI. On the retail side, cost really matters, because the more cost I bring to the business, the more I'm going to have to pass on to the end consumer, unless I can get efficiencies from that. So I think they're going to be very judicious on the use of agentic AI to make sure they're getting it right. It actually has business benefit and seeing a lot of value. So I think in terms of pragmatic whole-scale use cases, I think we're going to see a lot coming out of the retail industry on where can we really go and build efficiencies from that, because that drives their entire business going forwards.
Okay, and maybe just sort of slight change of tack, broaden the conversation out a little bit. Be good to understand in terms of Europe specifically. It's got a reputation, I guess, for strong ethical standards, regulatory frameworks, like I guess GDPR. People familiar?
Yeah.
How do you think, and is it? I guess it's desirable. But how do you think Europe can become a global leader when it comes to AI sovereignty, which is obviously a hot topic, shall we say?
It's a really hot topic. And you just need to have a look what was unveiled this year, the 13th of January. The UK government unveiled the AI Opportunities Action Plan, where they laid out a comprehensive strategy on how to position the UK as a global leader in artificial intelligence. The European Union have been doing very, very similar types of things. And broadly, if we take all of these types of legislations together, what they really look at is how do they go and provide the infrastructure to then go and enable AI-enabled data centers. So the UK example would be AI growth zones, supercomputing expansion. How do you then think about the implementation of that? So data is really key. Talent acquisition, so investment in skills training, talent acquisition, the building of a national data library is what they're looking at. And then how do you go and actually have it adopted and implemented in kind of things like the public sector and others in a ethical way? So there is a lot of legislation and work on a regulatory approach that's pro-innovation, but that really understands the different sector needs. So whether it is the risks in healthcare, the risks in financial services to the end citizens, there's been a lot of investment in that over the last few years. So I think Europe, if I take Europe, the EU and Britain, if we just go for that as Europe for the moment, there has been a lot of positive moves to investing in AI, getting the right regulatory frameworks, thinking about the right type of data. Obviously, issues like copyright are going to be challenging and always will be challenging from a political point of view and a policy making point of view. But I think we've got the balance right. We're getting much more convergence on legislation coming forwards. So we're able to go and have about 80–90% consistency around the world. And I think that's going to kind of unlock us to be able to go and innovate. I think at the heart of it, though, it has to be getting the right skills, the right talent, the right infrastructure in place to then go and unlock things going forwards. So the more we see kind of that investment, the better.
Okay, and I mean, you hinted maybe there, but in terms of any obstacles that will prevent or at least provide a challenge when it comes to Europe achieving sort of full AI sovereignty, and again, thoughts, I mean, can they, through policies and or innovation, sort of mitigate or address those, or you know, as we've seen in various cases, are we at some stage just going to have accept AI as a bit of a race to the bottom, you know, as a bit of a wild west, and the big folks will just kind of, you know, run a coach and horses through anything that anybody might want to put in place. I don't know.
Well, I think the first thing we saw in the news at the beginning of 2025 was the AI race is uncertain. Um, there's now the big debate on do you need to invest heavily in huge training kind of algorithms and data centers, rather much smaller impact. I think both are right. I think one of the things that's going to be really important is for the European Union is the skills, continuing to have consistency on the data sovereignty side of things, understanding copyright, and so we can go and have confidence in building models within inside of Europe. But the heart of all of this is allowing people to challenge orthodoxies, allowing people to go and put this into action is going to be the most important step. We have focused, I think, too much on these huge kind of data sets. By 2026, the largest language models out there will have run out of globally available information to go and index and understand. So what next? And so I think it's going to be actually looking at very specific implementations, moving beyond just this LLM view of the world to think that actually AI is broader, digital technology is broader than just a kind of an LLM, and the application of it is going to be the most important. I think that's where we're going to see the most amount of advancement. And I think Europe has a good history of being able to unlock that.
Yeah, I mean, just apropos, another, as if synthetic data, I think is proposed as a solution, which I can't get my brain round the idea of that. But anyway, we can maybe have a separate conversation
Yeah,
on that.
I think it is challenging, right? And I think it's also, I'm hoping we move around away from everything is AI enabled. You know, you buy a new washing machine, a toothbrush, probably a dog bowl, it's going to say it's AI enabled into, you know, what are the things that are actually going to go and drive value for end consumers and businesses that can be accelerated using AI. Most of the time, you don't need to go and use kind of these huge complicated systems. You just need to focus on the basics and go and get that right because it's the supportability, the customer experience that is the most important part on any digital experience.
Yeah, and just before we finish, a couple more AI sovereignty questions, I guess. But you know, Europe, as you say, UK, mainland Europe, etc. What chance is there, or what impact do you think they can have when it comes to, you know, the globe? Obviously, there are different players, different parts of the world, but how powerful or not do you think Europe can be when it comes to AI sovereignty and influencing the sort of global tech landscape? But where is their role, I suppose, is the question.
Well, if you think about Europe, what it is, it's great at financial services, a strong history in manufacturing, car manufacturing, innovation in the services industry. And so I think it's continue. I think I'm just going to use the UK government's, you know, latest round of announcements at the beginning of January, you know, putting that at the forefront of an economic prosperity agenda to be able to go and work out how we're going to go and leverage that. Some really simple things in the latest government's AI plans. How do you, and the data bill that they've been going through the Commons and the Lords recently, how do we just go and look at the productivity agenda? You know, how do we get a police officer to spend less time in computer screen by streamlining that process? The same in healthcare. How do we go and streamline that process by having less time at computer screen to go and work on high value added services? So I think quite often it's not necessarily just what AI experiences we can go and create. It is what can we go and unlock in terms of productivity? How do we go and give people time back to work on the things we really want them to work on, rather than being sat in front of a desk doing tasks that could be offloaded to a computer? So I think continuing that type of thinking is really important. One of the ones I really liked in the UK example recently was being able to go and create a map of all underground services. because it costs, I think it was about 2.4 billion pounds worth of essentially accidents doing things like roadworks where they might hit a pipe. Well, actually, that's a huge productivity loss there. And I think getting that right starts to change an economy. It changes the way people think. It changes the way people invest. I think that's what's going to unlock anything. Not a single announcement. I think it's continual investment in AI strategies, data-led strategies, and kind of bringing that forward and showing the public sector and governments can lead the way.
And maybe just finally, in terms of, I guess you'd call it regulatory flexibility, ethical AI, I'm never quite sure, convinced by that ethical AI actually exists, as I know everyone talks about it, but the reality is often people want to make money, so they'll sort of bend the rules, shall we say that? Maybe I'm cynical. But just your thoughts, I suppose, as to where the UK, you think its position is within this landscape, and how well positioned it is or not, when it comes to leading the charge with global innovation in this area. I mean, is it got a massive opportunity, or will it sort of be marginalized just because of who it is? And just your thoughts, I suppose.
Well, I think a massive opportunity because what they haven't looked at is regulating technology as a whole. They've looked at it from a sectoral point of view because the concern, any ethical concern really is what risk does this impose? And a technology can be applied in multiple different ways. Take just something as simple as a chatbot. My washing machine might break and I need that fixed. So I might start with a chatbot versus I've got pain in my left arm, my chest is feeling a little bit tight. You probably wouldn't use a chatbot, but you might. The risk of getting that wrong has a very different profile on either side. So I think the UK is taking an incredibly pragmatic approach by working with industry regulators in a sectoral approach to look at the implications of technology for that sector. The same with the European Union, things like DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act in banking, starts to look at what is the risk behind the banking sector as a whole, and how do we start to go and provide guidance and regulation to go and provide protections for the consumer, but also certainty to a business on how they need to operate within inside of the sector. That then allows them to be unlocked to go and innovate within inside of those regulations. So I think actually the European Union and the UK are doing a really good job of that consistency, sectoral approach to go and start to unlock that innovation.
Okay, we covered a fair amount of ground there, and
Yeah,
really appreciate your time as ever, James. Some fascinating answers and thoughts as to what's going on. Maybe we can catch up in a few months' time and see, because it's a fast-moving landscape for sure. But at least for now, appreciate your time. Thank you very
thank
much.
thank you, Phil.